Welcome to the AT Innovation and Impact podcast, where we dive deep into the assistive technology innovations transforming lives. I'm Mariam Bandikta. This series is brought to you by the Global Disability Innovation Hub's flagship AT 2030 program, and it's funded by the UK Aid. In this episode, we are going back to the basics of AT innovation to learn about what innovation means and why it is needed, especially in the AT space. We are joined by Ben Hardman, the head of AT Innovation Ecosystems at the Global Disability Innovation Hub. Ben leads the GDI Accelerate, the AT innovation arm of GDIHub, with a vision to create disability-inclusive world through partnerships with innovators, tech firms, academic institutions, investors, NGOs, and organizations of persons with disabilities. Ben, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Mariam. How are you?
I'm great, thank you so much. So let's start from the beginning. What is AT innovation and how is this different from innovation or entrepreneurship?
Yeah, good question. I think, so if you take innovation as a word, it's very overused. There's many definitions for innovation, just doing things better than they've been done before. That's one way of looking at it. From my perspective, I think when we innovate, we need to be creating something that adds value to the world in a certain context. So if it's commercial innovation, then it's about making money and selling products. If it's AT, it's about driving access to wonderful experiences, enabling access for wonderful experiences for persons with disability. If innovation doesn't make it to market or doesn't make it to the person that needs it, it's not innovation. And that there needs to be a really kind of clear distinction between invention, which is in the lab. That's about coming up with ideas, developing technologies. Innovation is about the application of those ideas and those technologies that drive some kind of value. So in the AT space, the value is really, 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 really clear, really, really tangible and really, really measurable. So it's a wonderful space to innovate within because there are so many spaces for improvement in the world. We're not looking at marginal improvements in the work that we do, we're looking at kind of significant life-changing experiences created through innovation. So that's where AT innovation is slightly different to innovation within FMCG or fast-moving goods. That's more about really fine-tuning desirable products for commercial applications, for users with high amounts of disposable income. That's still innovation, but it's a very different problem that you're trying to solve. And we're focusing really on those people around the world that are generally living in poverty, generally living in low to middle income countries, and are really being let down by the market failures, I guess capitalism to a degree, and the lack of investment and money in the system. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. So, ultimately, AT innovation, or the people that are developing these innovations, they're running a business, right? So when we say we are developing AT innovations for the good of the world or good of the humankind or people with disabilities, how do you think that the AT innovators should approach that product development and commercialization, I guess? Because ultimately there needs to be an ROI and they need to make money. So what would you say to that?
I think my perspective is that creativity is kind of at the heart of innovation. That's creativity from a technical perspective, it's creativity from a solution perspective, and it's creativity from a business perspective. So it takes all of those views to really bake in for an AT innovator or an AT business a successful solution. I think, if I put myself in an innovator's shoes within the AT space, they're solving a really, really difficult problem. For the reasons I mentioned earlier, is that there isn't as much money in the system, there isn't much funding and investment. The users don't have as much disposable income, if any. So the route to the user is much more convoluted and complex, and it requires other stakeholders to be engaged in the process, other funders to enable the technology to reach the user. So that side of things is very complex, I think, for an AT innovator, and running a startup anyway is difficult, right? The hit rate for a startup is 10%, if you're lucky, from the early idea stage through to an organisation that's fundable or investable. So that failure rate has to be accepted, and it has to be kind of harnessed and addressed in a way.
Yeah.
You know, and that, you know, when we work with innovators, we also have to kind of appreciate that economy of scale. Not everybody's going to make it, and it's our job to make sure that we give those innovators the best chance that they can to make it. But if they don't make it, that's fine too. You know, their creativity can be applied to another problem. So I would say, as an innovator, apply your creativity to a problem, do what you feel passionate about. But at a certain point, you're right in that it needs to become viable. And it's that switch from a creative front-end process to something that's viable as a business, that's really super critical within AT. We help as an organisation, you know, in terms of capacity building to get to that point and funding, but it really requires the more commercial funders and investors to see AT innovation as a space where money can be made.
Yeah.
So we're catering within AT for a wide range of stakeholders who all want something different. I'll just touch on, before I move on to the next question, just touch on this distinction between the grant-funded ecosystems and the more commercial ecosystem, because they are very different. It's very clear within the AT sector or field, it requires that catalytic upfront funding and investment and support. So those organisations who don't need a return, you know, their purpose is to back innovation for good.
Yeah.
And if they can see that happening, they're happy with their investment. But that doesn't breed necessarily successful businesses.
Yeah.
And that's where the commercial world of investment has to step in, or we have to find a way to blend the two and provide ventures with a really clear commercial view of how their business can work. And it's only at that point that a business can really scale.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to scale a business without just purely on grant funding alone.
Yeah.
So that's a real kind of challenge, I think, for AT innovators to navigate that transition from one to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. We have heard from a couple of innovators from Innovate Now program, Brian of Hope Tech and Sylvia from Sina Consulting, who've been greatly successful through the skills that they've learned from the program, and they've been able to commercialize their products. So I guess what you're saying is that we need to capacity build for the innovators, the creatives, the engineers that come through the program, teach them or train them in business skills, really. And then at the same time, we need to create awareness and mechanisms in the commercial or private funding, I guess, ecosystem to bring the two together and meet in the middle. So how do you think GDI Accelerate is working towards that?
Yeah. So we work with really early stage innovators. So as early as early career researchers straight out of university, or just somebody with a really great idea. And at that stage, like you say, an innovator or somebody with an idea and a passion, which is really, really valuable, may not have those kind of harder skills in terms of how to solve that problem.
Yeah.
You know, they've identified a problem, and they may have an idea, but solving that problem can be done in many different ways, and kind of innovation should, if it's applied correctly, address every single option there is to solve that problem. So as an organisation, we provide the environment for that innovation process to work. And that's, you could call it universal design, you could call it human-centred design. So a way for those ventures to really challenge themselves to tackle those problems in the right way, using the right process. So give them both the space, which is really important, and time to do that. And that's where grant funding is great, because that provides like low risk environment, you know, for creativity to happen, but also those hard skills. So the skills around, you know, understanding problems really well, working with users, involving users at every step of the process, ensuring that passionate entrepreneurs don't just follow an idea because they love that idea. They follow an idea because it's solving a problem, and that's really what entrepreneurs need to be passionate about. So that's what we encourage through our programs. So hackathons, makeathons, pre-accelerators which support the idea stage, so getting an idea to a point where maybe you've prototyped it and you're able to test it with some users. Accelerators like Innovate Now, where the solution is more developed, but maybe the marketing, and the route to market is not as well established. So providing, hard skills, programs, education and curriculum to help innovators do that, alongside lots of mentorship and expert support from us, from GDIHub, from the Innovate Now team, and from other external mentors that we'll bring in and out of programs. We can talk about kind of the more commercial side of what we do, which is tackling that transition from purely just grant funding into a more commercial space, which is around funding. So at a certain point, if a venture's found a really good market fit for their product, they need some help to really kind of, I guess, drive a wedge into that opportunity. And it may be about a geography that they want to kind of really hone in on, or it may be a type of disability that they're trying to address, or it could be a specific kind of technology. So funding is very, very important, applied in the right way. So knowledge capital's like number one, network capital, so providing a support network around the innovators through these programs. And then capital, which sometimes is assumed as the most important thing, is probably not within AT, certainly not in the early stages, but it is required at a certain point. So we create vehicles to enable more commercial capital to enter the space and back ventures more in a kind of a VC style way.
So that's wonderful to hear that you're working on both ends, and also in the middle, sort of creating vehicles for people to experiment, prototype, and test the products. So how important is it to fail early, especially in the AT innovation space?
It's the most important thing. There's a principle called the riskiest assumption test, or the RAT test. So it's really super important early on to test the most risky assumptions, rather than try to solve a technical problem or a marketing problem or a design problem. What's the most riskiest thing about your idea? It could be the business model, it could be the route to market, it could be the maturity of the technology. So the RAT test forces the innovator to write a list, effectively, 1 to 10, what are the most risky assumptions around your idea, and focus on number 1 first. And don't move on to number 2 until you've passed go. And that's a really common failure point in the innovation process, is that doesn't happen. But if it's done properly, you'll find that the failing fast does start to happen. So you fail at number 1. So what's the next solution to the problem that may circumvent that risky assumption? And the innovator can move through a process like that. So failing fast is critical because you're spending the least amount of time, effort and resources to learn the most. And if you're not doing that, then you're probably spending a lot of time, effort and money on the wrong things.
So that's great to hear. So talk me through the different vehicles GDI Accelerate has or offers at the moment. So you mentioned hackathon, co-design, then you mentioned accelerators like Innovate Now. Is there anything further? What are you currently focusing on?
So we also try to live by the same principles as the innovators. So we're trying to fail fast, we're also trying to scale. So as an organisation, the way we can scale is by replicating what works. So through the programme Innovate Now, which has been running for 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah,
Almost.
and it's our job to then package up those learnings, what works, what doesn't work, and scale that model. So right now, our plans are really around how we do that throughout Africa, throughout Asia, and that involves a similar localized model of innovation acceleration that we have with Innovate Now. So countries like Rwanda, there's a huge need for AT innovation to try to catalyse the supply of AT and technology and problems that solutions that solve those problems is something that needs to happen. It needs to happen now. It needs to happen 20 years ago,
Yeah.
So we feel like the model in Kenya has proven itself. Innovate Now is ready to become a self-sustaining local entity, so we can refocus on other areas. So let's go to Rwanda, let's try and do the same thing. Let's go to Ghana, let's try and do the same thing. India, the UK. So let's spin up acceleration models owned by local organisations around the world. So that's one thing we're doing. Another thing we're doing is as I mentioned earlier, that kind of transition into the more commercial space where innovators need more capital and they need more support in like really scaling their businesses. There isn't really anything within our space that provides that platform. So innovators, it's called the Valley of Death. You know, they refer to it as the Valley of Death, and it's the point at which they move from kind of non-commercial to commercial funding. So our next program that we're mobilising now focuses on solving that problem for innovators, but for disabled people around the world, because they're not receiving high volumes of high quality, affordable assistive technology. So there's a problem that we can solve there. And it's about extending that innovation, those innovation principles into a more commercial context and providing more capital to be deployed in the right ways for those AT innovators that have really established themselves and are showing very promising signs of being able to scale. And by scale, we mean reaching millions of users. So that's the ambition. We're working hard to make that happen.
Yeah. And how are you working hard to make that happen? What would you say if someone's watching, I guess, or listening, who may be interested in working towards that? How can they approach you?
There are kind of many ways to cut it. The concept that we're working on is a growth fund, and that simply is a very specialised investment bank. So it's an independent entity, and the job of that bank is to fundraise, so receive money into the bank and also deploy those funds in the right way. And by that I mean working with a small number of very promising AT ventures and providing them with not only the financial capital, but also the technical and knowledge capital that we can provide as an organisation and as a wider ecosystem. Network capital, which really means the experts, the people, the NGOs, the universities, the tech companies, the investors, you know, all of those ecosystem actors around a common problem, aligning everybody's incentives under one roof and providing a patient vehicle for AT innovators to test, learn, fail, but also scale.
Great. So it's wonderful to hear that you're strategically thinking about almost shaping the AT innovation ecosystem globally, from hackathons, as you mentioned, to sort of medium scale in accelerators in different parts of the world, and then sort of driving this vision of almost mainstreaming AT. So what do you think? What do you foresee in that 10 to 15 years time? What would AT innovation be like? Where would we be? What's the vision?
Honestly, I don't think we'll be calling it AT in 10 or 15 years time, and that really should be our ambition. Is that in 10 or 15 years time, these vehicles aren't going to be required. We'll have solved that problem. Private investors, who are very familiar with medtech, biotech, AT at the moment is not on their radar. Assistive technology is not very well understood. I think it's relatively fragmented as a field of knowledge and the awareness. So the job that we have to do as a sector is tell that story. Yeah. So wherever we can point at success stories within the sector, whether it's innovation, whether it's NGOs doing amazing work, whether it's governments backing rehab strategies in developing countries, really making those systems work in favour of persons with disability, that just tells the story. And I think the value of AT will then be recognised by those people that we're not talking to at the moment. And that's always the job of a marketing team or a marketeer, is to not just focus on the people that are listening. The bigger opportunity is those that don't know you exist. Yeah. So I feel like AT will, as a as a sector will establish itself. I think it will be seen as a very cross-cutting theme. You know, it cross-cuts across all of those other sectors that I mentioned, and you know, the value of it will then be recognised, and it will become mainstream, and that's what we're trying to do. And when something becomes mainstream, it's not necessarily seen as kind of this niche, quite hard to access sector. So that's kind of where we see 15 years' time.
Yeah. I have one last question.
Okay.
Obviously, we've seen, even in the last 2 years, huge improvements and advancements in AI, use of AI and machine learning. Just recently, we heard from OpenAI and ChatGPT 4.0, multimodal, multilingual AI. So how do you think that AI or just multimodal conversation agents will disrupt or drive the AT innovation space?
Yeah, it's already happening, right?
Yeah.
I think AI is interesting, and you know, I'm not an expert in the ethics of AI, but what I would say is there is a lot of noise. You know, with any kind of new technology, it's difficult to really pick up those strong signals within all of the noise. And certainly from an innovation perspective, I think the way to really identify the value of it is to really be clear about the problem that it's seeking to solve, not push AI at everything, because it's clearly, you know, powerful, you know, incredibly powerful technology. But if it's not applied, if it's applied to everything or not applied in the right way, then I think that's where the kind of the challenges lie. But to answer your question directly, you know, if you take the fields of kind of human-computer interaction, kind of spatial computing, AI, and kind of combine them, you know, accessible assistants are already here. They're already mainstreaming, but for persons with disability, they're life-changing.
Yeah.
They're not just useful applications for productivity. Genuinely life-changing. And I think that area is going to be incredibly, it's like an arms race, you know. We're seeing kind of technologies develop at such pace and solving problems at such speed. You know, for persons with visual impairment, you can now, for $300, you can wear an accessible assistant. It will describe the environment around you, hands-free. You can converse with it. It will help you to read a book. It will summarise text for you. So for me, I don't have a diagnosed disability. For me, that's useful. I find kind of reading a lot of text or absorbing a lot of text quite difficult. But for someone who is visually impaired, it's just life-changing. So, you know, that's an incredible space. I think that's going to really revolutionise what's possible.
Yeah.
It's driving down the cost, though. You know, certainly for low to middle income countries where, you know, maybe you know the kind of the centralised procurement or the centralised support from government isn't quite there, or the health systems aren't quite there to provide those technologies to people. It's really up to innovators and the private sector to really show what's possible and do that at a price that's affordable.
Yeah.
You know, not free. I don't think the charity model is the solution to everything. Certainly, you know, affordable, you know, to drive access. So I think, for me, it's a really exciting area of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. And it was lovely to have you and hear your experience and insights.
Thank you so much.
No worries.